Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. It has been an interesting start to November without question. We are in our third session. And for those of you who are new, welcome. We do have some new people that joined the group later. So we hope that everybody had a chance to watch the first video and got a sense of all of the documentation, because we won't go through that. And if not, you can always go back and have a look at that after this video. But my name is Chris Sarsky. I am one of the consultants with the CART Consortia, and I have a fantastic partner who is the brains behind all the concepts and all of that assessment stuff that we talk about up front, which is so critical. And that person is Ted, and I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Ted Zeroni. I'm working with the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium, ERLC, as a learning consultant as well. I'm based out of Sherwood Park, but and right now I'm coming from this cold, so snowy, windy Saskatchewan. So anyway, welcome everyone.
All right, so we are going to go through the organizing idea of matter in this particular session. And it is definitely a bit of a carryover from all of the other grades. So we're going to address that as we go through materials today. But we want to kind of start up front with the documents again, our curriculum documents, and unpacking sort of the terminology that's showing up in there, so that we're all sort of working on the same page and understanding the importance of the same terminology, regardless of whether you're starting matter now or not. Okay, so I'm going to begin with our land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten. Oh, and I see that it says living systems there. It should say matter. I'm going to play this short little clip for you, because the outcomes that you have today are very, very strongly tied to our acknowledgement and to the meaning of how Indigenous people are looking at the matter that is surrounding us and what we have accessible to us in a natural state. So let me just grab this.
The water is in this story, the origin of life. Talks about these women, grandmothers, that were asked by the Creator, which ones will come here. First one, Creator asked, he made that one the moon, grandmother. Second one, he made into Mother Earth. The third one, he made into water. That's the life. There's lots of life in that water. It's a woman, grandmother. The fourth one, he made into the image of woman we see walking around on earth today. That one carry life into this world of the Creator. That's where we're born from. And there's more to that. But for now, just so you know, for us people, what we're trying to do is preserve what we have. Canada's built on our traditions, built on our stories, because we were the first ones here. Everything that Canada is come from us. So if you go back to that story and know where we come from, the woman is strong, but today the woman's voice is taken out of decision-making processes in this system. That's why there's chaos. There's no more balance in that with respect to how the relationships go. That's what I was told by my grandfathers in my ceremony. We always hear this term growing up. What kind of a world are we going to leave for our children? Everything's being poisoned off. I ask, what kind of a child are we going to leave for the world? If we don't teach our children the proper way to respect Mother Earth, if we don't talk to our children and our grandchildren how to respect the environment, how to respect those birds, those animals, the trees, what kind of a world is that going to be?
Okay. Let's see if I can get back to this here. So it's really important that we, wherever we can, include our Indigenous ties to our curriculum and embed them within our teaching, as opposed to sort of a one-off, bring it in. And the particular area that we're covering in Matter in grade 3 lends itself really well to having those conversations. So I have some additional resources that we're going to talk about a little bit later as we go through that. So in these short videos that we have, or short opportunities that we have to be with you, in an hour, we can't really unpack an entire unit in maybe the detail that we would like to. But what we would like to do is always look at what are the sort of the driving concepts that are sitting in this unit that we're about to unpack. What are some things that we should always keep in the back of our mind when we're doing assessment? And then what are some possible resources that I could use to unpack this? And so in doing those kind of short bits within the hour, we're hoping that you kind of come away with the confidence and feeling like you have that efficacy, you have that toolbox, that you have something that you can draw from, especially for those who are new to the grade or new to the subject, or don't have any resources in this particular topic. So it gives you at least hopefully a starting point to go from. As always, we love it when you have your videos on, so thank you when you do. And we know that there's reasons that you can't, and that's fine. Some of you are multitasking. It's fine if you are, and you want to leave your video on, that's fine too. But however it works for you, that's best. We do encourage you, though, to chime in at any time. Just unmute yourself if you have a question or a comment, or you've done something in this area already that's been really successful. It's great to share that with your peers as well, because we're just giving you snapshots at the very best. A reminder that not every topic, every organizing idea is covered in grade 3. So we won't be doing space. That's one that drops off at the end. Other than that, we're right through to the end of everything. And what I'd like to do right now is just maybe talk a little bit about that organizing idea that we find in our document. I'm not going to unpack this whole document again. But what I do want to do is just focus on that top line. Remember, for science, it's green in color. LA is blue, math is that brownish orange color. They all have their own unique color, but the design of them is identical. And the darkest color on any one of your documents that you look at is always the organizing idea. And the word that comes behind it, in this case, matter, tells you which idea we're going to focus on. But more importantly, this organizing idea is crossing over multiple grades. In this case, it's covering kindergarten to grade 6. So 7 grades share the same organizing idea statement. It doesn't change regardless of what grade I teach. And that means that this one line that sits across all of these grades houses what we've always used to call essential rocks, essential learning outcomes, the big ideas. That's where I'm going to find those. And it's really important that we're able to find the same concepts, regardless of what order we teach them in, where we live in the province, it doesn't matter. We should all be able to look at any one of those lines, but the first one in particular, and identify what are the big rocks, what are the big concepts that are sitting there that ties all of these grades together. And then how I unpack that concept in my grade, in this case, grade 3, if you think of it as an inverted triangle, the broad base is that organizing idea statement that we just read. And then as I start to unpack it more specifically and get down to the point would be the learner outcome that's sitting in my grade. I have to unpack for my kids at their level, given the realm that this particular organizing idea had. So this is a really important line for us to remember and to always go back to. In the wording of those cusps, we also have some words, and I'm going to go through them again. This time, we probably won't do it the next time, but we just want to reiterate that the word include, if that shows up in a statement that you're reading in a document, regardless of what subject it is, but we're in science right now, anything that comes behind the word include is a must do. In other words, you must include those words, terminologies, whatever it is, in your lesson. It is not saying it's the only thing that you put in your lesson. It's saying that has to be there. And yes, if you have great practices and you've had success in other ways as well, absolutely, you're still going to put that in. You're not throwing away best practices. But what is stated there, in this case, stretching, pulling, squeezing, pushing, those would still be there. We wouldn't move those away. We would make sure that those are incorporated in the lesson. When we talk about forces and we have the word such as, let's go to the bottom, or sorry, matter, we'll go to the bottom. Anything that comes behind the word such as, in this case, trees, rocks, ice, shells, plants, animals, those are examples. You are welcome to use them. You're welcome to add to them. You're welcome to only use a couple of them. That's entirely up to you. If you have better examples that would resonate better with the students in the area you live in, then by all means do that. But such as gives you that flexibility to use, add on, delete, do whatever works best for your students, as long as they're getting the idea of the outcome and what that statement is saying. And then the one that is in brackets, words that are in brackets, they don't happen that often. But when they do, it's a terminology that we need to make sure that we teach the student. So in this case, the word applied. Applied is a term that we would teach to our student. However, when I'm working with them and maybe we're doing an activity or performance-based assessment, I may not every time I have something to say regarding the word applied, use the word applied. I might use more user-friendly lay language with the student. And again, you have that flexibility as the teacher. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Ted, and he is going to take us through some of our really important stuff to start with.
Thanks, Chris. Those of you who are at the previous grade 3 session with living systems know that I'm going to change up this part of the presentation a little bit, add new layer on. So bear with me. And sometimes when you hear things a second time, we get a different take on things, and we can add to our own learning in this way. And I hope that's what happens if you've been to our session previous to this one. Anyway, I'm really glad that Chris opens up with that, the video that she does with the land acknowledgement, because there's one line that really strikes me is in that whole video is, what kind of children do we want to leave for our world? And that resonates well with what kind of children do we want when they leave our classrooms, when they leave our schools at the end of the day. And if I was to ask you what it is that our students will need to know as they move on into really fast changing, unpredictable future, there are likely some common things that we come up with. And I'd like you to think of some of those things that we perhaps may need our children to know and be able to do. And just think about that as Chris just presses play on the video that takes a little snippet into what our future world might look like. Yes, that's a robot moving. It's solid parts in the fluidity of human movement. And when you think about some of the facial features that they can now put on robots, if you Google that, you'll find like facial features on robots. It'll be very human-like facial features, the facial wrinkle with a smile, or give a little subtle change with the eyes to express some kind of motion. And we don't really know what's happening down the road. And we know with social media, we're faced with so many things. Our kids are faced with so many things. We want to make sure that when they leave our classroom, our schools, we give them the best opportunity to be successful. And when you think about those things that are what students need to be successful, if you ask anybody, I'm sure you've had these conversations before, the words are quite similar in terms of what we want our children to be like and have when they leave our school. So Chris, we can go to the next slide. I'm just going to refer to the competencies. They've been out for a while, but the expectation is that within our lessons and what we do with our children, that we give them opportunities to grow and foster those competencies such as critical thinking and creativity and so on. We want our kids to be literate so that when they come across information, they'll know what to do, be able to read it and make meaning of it, and to be have solid skills in the area of numeracy. So they have the basic essential skills that'll take them through a future that can change and weave, but these things will stick with them and will be essential when they leave our schools. So when we unpack the curriculum, we have that in our minds as well, because what we don't want to have happen is we don't want the curriculum to be used as a checklist that I've covered this, I've covered this, I've covered this, because when you look at it, we could probably easily do that. We could take out a knowledge outcome and just teach to it and then test kids on it, and same with the skills portion. But we need to be more than that, because if we just do that, we're not hitting any of those competencies or doing things that help promote those things that will help our kids be successful in the future. So if we can go to the next slide, Chris. One of the words that Chris has mentioned many times, and one of the words that I'm going to be referring to many times in my part of the presentation here, is the idea of concept. And it may be a familiar idea to you, and sometimes it's a little bit confusing. There's a little bit of confusion as to what a concept is. So I'm just going to take us through a little concept attainment activity to help develop the concept of concept. I have several words there: example, shoe, shovel, and novel. Those are all examples of a concept. Right is not a concept. Jog is not a concept. Aluminum is not a concept, nor is Gone with the Wind. There's something about those yes words, those examples of concepts, they all have in common. There are a few attributes. If I was to show you the next slide too, then, and there's some more words, I'm going to ask you if you could think to yourself, where would you put those? Is courage a concept or not? How about water? Is Christmas a concept? Or perhaps is truth a concept? And where I'm going to put them on the next slide is in these spots here. Courage and truth would go with concept. Christmas and water would not. And the reason is because a concept is this. When you take a look at them, they all are nouns that share a specific attribute. So when we take a look at and have many examples, so if we look at story, for example, it's got a definition, and we can think of examples of many things that we would say are stories. And stories have certain attributes such as the beginning, middle, the end, characters, and a problem to resolve. So anything that fits those attributes would be considered a story and fit that concept. We go to the next slide, Chris. So a concept is certainly like a filing system, right? We put things that are all similar in our file folders, and we give that file folder a name, and that's generally a concept. So we take a look here. We know that all those things in the picture here are vehicles. That's one concept. But there are two other more specific concepts. Car and truck are more specific, right? They not only are vehicles, have wheels, and they're self-motorized, but a car has something, a truck is something it has that will carry big and heavy things, where a car maybe is just meant for passengers. And then when we get to that item in the middle, we kind of scratch our head, well, what would that be? We'd have to make up a different maybe concepts as to what that actually is. Next slide, Chris. So concepts are those things, and like I mentioned, can be organized, specific or general. depending on where we are. The younger we are, we're at the younger grades, the concepts do become more specific, and eventually they become sort of just common knowledge. And some people argue, well, those aren't really concepts because they're just so common and it's just a fact. But when we get younger, the concept may be a fact as we get older. That's not too important to know. I think that the key is that there are certain concepts that are more subject specific, and the more subject specific you go, the more specific those concepts will be. For example, you find ecosystem more in the science discipline, less than you would in language arts or art, for example. So there are some subjects centered concepts as well. Next slide, please, Chris. I'm going to go to the, have you go to the even, I'm going to have to come back to that slide later on, Chris. Go skip the concept map for now. Yeah, if we can go to there. So understanding a concept is important because I want you to look at the curriculum through two lenses and a conceptual lens. And what a conceptual lens is a way of looking at something that provides a focus. So for example, if I said, look at this photo through the conceptual lens of resources, you would focus on certain things. You might focus on the cool water, which is a resource, or the sand. But if I told you to look at that photo through the conceptual lens of our senses, suddenly you get a different thing. You'd also feel the coolness of the sand or the water, but you may focus on other things that might be accompanied with that photo, like the smells that might be there or the sounds that might be there that accompany that picture. So that's what a conceptual lens does. And that's why I want to look at the curriculum through two conceptual lenses here in a second. When we look at through the conceptual lens, or I'm going to have you go to the next slide, Chris, sorry. So if I was to say, then let's look through our curriculum through the conceptual lens of a concept, you'd be looking for those things, for those concepts. So I pulled out the learning outcome plus one of those layers of cusps from the curriculum. So we have the associated knowledge, understanding, and skills and procedure. What I'd like you to do is look at that and see if you could pull out certain things you would say that those are the concepts in that information. So when it comes to the outcome, what are the concepts in the outcome? What concepts are related to the knowledge, understanding, and skill? And see if something pops out of you or any of them come out at you. I'll give you a few seconds and then we'll see if we can, we'll quickly identify them here. Go ahead, Chris. All the words I highlighted are concepts, right? Materials are concepts, natural materials, a product, physical matter, plants, animals, land, processed materials, natural materials, and so on. Balance, harmony, and land are concepts. Those are all words that kids will need to fully understand in order to reach the learning outcomes. If we go to the next slide, you'll find that there are even more concepts that might have been missed. And I call these verb or I guess skill-related concepts. So when we take a word like students investigate, what they're doing is they're going to create something, an investigation. So there's a thing related to the skill, and that thing is a concept related to it. If we're going to analyze, we're creating an analysis. We're going to identify examples. We're going to provide examples. We're going to exemplify. Same with compare. We're going to get a comparison as we go through things. So when we take a look through the conceptual, through this learning outcome through the conceptual lens of concepts, those are the things that pop up at you. Now, Chris, I'm going to get you to back up a few slides to that concept map. Right. So if we were to take all those concepts, then if you were to sit down and say, I'm going to look at this from the conceptual lens of concepts, here's what we might come up with. And when you do that and you pull them together, you get a little bit of meaning to the unit. So for example, the way you could read this is the way this organizing idea is organized is this way. Materials can be either natural or processed and exist in a certain state, such as solid, liquid, and gas. So the different states of matter have different properties such as volume, flow, and shape, and so on. So by pulling those concepts out, you can provide a whole different set of meaning to all the things you're putting together here. So if we can go then, Chris, move on to the next conceptual lens. Thanks. Yeah, that would be a better place to stop. So in a concept map are a whole lot of different concepts, and you're not going to spend a whole lot of time or equal amount of time on each one. But when you take a look at the learning outcomes and your cuffs, you'll find that there are certain concepts that repeat themselves. And those are what we call the anchor ones. Those are the ones you want to make sure you spend time helping students explore and fully understand, because once they know those, then they can go on and make deeper meaning with them. You'll see they even show up in the guiding question, for example, right? How can materials change? We see material and change in there. Or the learning outcome itself, students investigate and analyze materials and how they have the potential to be changed. So those are the key ones that we're going to be working with as we go along here. If you look through the curriculum, through the conceptual lens of skills and procedures, you'll notice some other things. And that's the right-hand side column. They're the doing words or the thinking or action words that we do. So we can go to the next slide, Chris. I'm going to just have you go directly to the link. So what I've done was I listed all the skills or the skill procedure statements from this organizing idea, and they're listed there. So as you're going through this, what you'll want to do is focus on the skill itself first, all right? So for example, identify examples, investigate, compare, and discuss. And when you do that, you'll notice, if you go to the next tab at the bottom, Chris, you'll notice that the skill statements, so those statements are broken into two parts. There's the skill part, and then there's the part that's directly related to the knowledge side, the other side. And that has some implications when you really want to teach that skill and then assess that skill. And what I'm going to ask you to do or consider as we move on here is to don't just go to that statement and say, well, I'm going to have students compare natural and processed materials without first providing opportunities to learn how to compare and contrast without being responsible for the course material. Because you'll want them to be good at that skill when you attach it to the content of the course they're related to. Because when we combine those things, that's where you get the understanding, right? So take time to practice and talk about what comparing and contrasting is. I have an example for you later on. And then take some time to develop what natural and processed materials are and make sure they understand those two things. When you feel good about both of them and they know they're competent in both of those halves of the equation, then you could put them together and put them through that activity. And finally, another tip is the last tab on the bottom there, Chris, to clarify the skill procedure. Do read them carefully, because if you're going to separate them, you're going to need to make sure you understand what they mean, those skills, and how you can give kids feedback. For example, if you're going to take the very first outcome, identify example, or first statement, identify examples of natural and processed materials and environment. Identify really means to classify. And so you'll want to give kids lots of practice classifying different things before you give them that opportunity to say, classify natural and processed materials. Card charts are good for that, and Chris is going to show you lots of examples of how to develop that skill. So at the end of the day, even when you look at research, there are certain things with research that are related to grades 1 to 3. If you look at the competencies, they will list the research as one of the competencies, and they'll tell you what's expected at grade 3 for research. So you can use those to help you with that. And we can move away from this slide now, Chris. So keep that in mind with skills and procedures. You want to make sure to separate them both, make sure they're competent in both before you have them work together for both. So at the end of the day, then, we're going to have a list of organizing key concepts and some key skills that we want kids to do when they're done with this organizing idea. And in order to do that, like I said, we could do this through a checklist, but what we need to do is slow down, I think, and take stock of the teaching strategies we have and purposely choose some activities that will help kids go through the learning process, which is the next slide. Many of you are probably familiar with the work of Hattie and Donahue that talks about surface, deep, and transfer learning. Surface is that getting that really solid understanding of the basics. What is that concept? What are properties? What's material? What is change? What is compare and contrast? What does it mean to describe? So a really good solid understanding of those things before we go into the deep part, but really we get them to make connections. You know, what's the connection between a property and perhaps description? What are the connections between those concepts? And things like concept maps are good for helping kids show that. And then what do we do to get them to transfer their understanding later on? I'm going to show you another slide that maybe can say, well, that's what those researchers found. But our curriculum, I think, is sort of looks to be organized in that way. I'm going to go one back, Chris.
Sorry.
The previous slide, right? So if you take a look at our curriculum, the knowledge, the right-hand column, and the skills and processes on the right-hand column, those skills, those are the surface level stuff. That's what we want the kids to get good at. And then that middle column is the understanding. And then we've got the learning outcome on top. So we want to take the kids through those three phases. And we can't do it if we go a checklist approach. What we need to do is be intentional and choose certain instructional strategies to help us along the way. So that's where we can go to the next slide, Chris. If we take a look at this list, you'll find there are a lot of things that you probably heard of and know and do and have in your repertoire of teaching. You've done card sorts before, Freyer model, four corners, jigsaw, role-playing, all mind mapping, concept mapping, a whole lot of things you've probably done, inquiry, project-based learning. So as teachers, we're very good. We've got all these things, but what we want to do is make sure when we use them that we're intentional about when we use them. So that's when we go to the next slide. So if we want to do work at that surface level, there are lots of different things we can do and that you probably do already. I have some links there. We don't have to go through this, but if I was going to teach my students how to, in one of the skills, research those at just pulling the skill out, explicitly teaching to it and giving kids practice in it and defining what it is and saying, here's how you compare and contrast. Here's how you make an inference. Here's how you do this. And then have them practice that with stuff they're not related or they're not responsible for in terms of course content. That's the way you can get them to that knowledge or that surface level understanding of that, because they're not going to be competing with the knowledge. They'll be focused on understanding the process and the skill, and that's where you can give them your feedback. And same with concepts and so on. You'll want them to be developed at that level. Then we can move to the understanding, and then we can move to the learning outcome after that. And depending on, so when I say the word intentionality, that's exactly what I mean. If you find a learning activity and say, where is this best fit in this whole process? Am I just helping them to understand and deepen their understanding of key parts? Am I really working on an understanding or the connection of the parts? And I'll show you an example of what I mean by that I think by looking at the next slide. Because when we're trying to assess knowledge at a surface level, or skills and knowledge and understanding level, we're going to be doing some similar but different things. If we go to the sample of assessment, Chris.
Oh, sorry.
At the top there, yeah. Properties is one of the words that kids learn in grade 2, and they need to know properties in grade 3 because you'll know the word that the concept property shows up with the properties of the different states of matter, such as shape and volume and viscosity. So making sure they understand surface is important. And you could ask them what it means, the word property means, or you can do a pre-assessment. And then if kids don't understand it, or if they have trouble with it, then that's where you could do a post-assessment very similar to this. So if you're going to assess at the surface level, you might want to ask them, what does it actually mean? What's the definition? In your own word, what does property mean? You'll get a good information that way. When you could give them some examples and non-examples of a property of an object and say, well, which of these would be properties? So if I'm describing the property of an object, what would be an example? So if I said it's heavier than a toothpick, is that an example of giving it, or that's an example of giving a description of the property of weight? And then you could ask them this: what would be, if you were going to describe this pencil, what would be some properties that you could focus on? So you could focus on color, which is the property, size, shape, texture, malleability. That's something you could test, not necessarily observe. So in grade 2, they talked about testable properties and observable properties and measurable properties. So there's 3 things related with properties that you can use to help describe that. So they should have a solid understanding of that by grade 3. But if they don't, that's how you want to go back. But those would be good ways to assess their understanding, their knowledge of that. But in terms of moving from knowledge to understanding, you have to do something a little bit different. And that's where we get into the deep part, right? So we could do something like this, where we'd, you'll notice that one of the skills and procedure statements read, research and compare the melting and freezing points of various materials, including water. Well, you could do that, right? You're gonna have the material on the right-hand column. I put source number 1, source number 2, because if you look at the competencies, and they're in Learn Alberta. If you go to Learn Alberta, where the curriculum are housed, you'll notice at the bottom they have competencies, and they're broken up by the 3 different grade or 3 different groupings: kindergarten, grade 1 to 3, and grades 4 to 6. If you look on grade 1 to 3 under the competencies under research, one of the things they ask is to have students use more than one source, and that they reference their source in some way. So you could use a chart like this, where they get a material such as, let's say copper. Source 1 is located here. It says this. Source 1 says 2. And based on my research, here's the melting and boiling point. And so we could have kids go through that, and they can find the differences out. But that fulfills that requirement, that where they're going to research and compare the boiling points. But the question is, can they show, what do they understand with that after doing that? And this is where then you can take an activity like this that works very much at the surface level and turn it into an understanding. Because how are you going to assess understanding? You have to ask them a question, like something like this. Go ahead, Chris. Just scroll down to the bottom, or to the next page. So associated with that, if you can scroll up to the a little bit more to the top of this second page, right there. In this, right beside the skill statement that said for students to research and compare, right beside in the middle column is this statement that we want kids to understand that materials can be described by their unique physical properties of melting and freezing and boiling points. How do you get that? How do you know if they understand it? Does that chart that they filled out prove that they understand it? We don't know until we pose some questions to them or have them do something else. So you may want to then to say, okay, do they understand that, what we just talked about? One thing you could do is then give them, have them build a concept map or something like this. I have some things that you might want to cut out and say, okay, to your kids, okay, this is why they need to be fully aware, really know these concepts at the surface level. They need to know what transparency means, tested, observed, and so on. Say, look, take these things and arrange them in a concept map and tell me why you made the connections you did. If they can do that, they are now demonstrating understanding. So we had that compare and contrast thing. That's still at the surface level. But now when we get them to bring their ideas together and they can express how these things are related, that's now where we're getting into understanding. So you want to ask those extra questions, and you can see there's some questions in the middle under understanding when we're talking about assessment, like can students provide examples in various forms and express their ideas in different ways. So when you can get them to do those things, you're getting evidence of understanding. And that's why it's really good to do some pre-tests before that, right? To say, okay, ask them that question ahead of time, they probably go, well, I don't know, and they'll scratch your head and may not have an answer. But then after you do the activity and develop those knowledge and skills and processes, now they're going to be able to compare because you've practiced with them. They're going to be able to do all that. And now you can put it all together at the end here. So Chris, can go to the next slide. There's a planning tool that may help you along the way. And Chris, we'll go through it really quickly. In the blue section there at the top, you can see the activity name and so on. You can sort of decide which cusps you want to use. This all drop-down menu. So that can help you with your planning as well. I've loaded up with the competencies as well. So for grades 1 to 3, I believe they would be, I think they're there, Chris, under, let's go to research, managing information. Is it? Yeah, because there's research in that one. Yeah. So, you could, that would help you with the research skills and processes parts, because they use that word a few times. And then it'll give you a chance there to pick out the key concepts you maybe want to working on for that activity. Or if it's a skill that you want to work on, there's some examples of the skills that you can work on. I think I have the wrong concepts in there, but I'll just double check them before I hand that off to you.
No, they're good.
Oh, those are the ones okay, that's the right grade. And same with the skills, there's some drop-down menu, because again, you'll want to isolate them and teach them. And if you've never taught a skill before, that's if you go back to that instructional approach one I have there, there's a link there to direct instruction of skills. It goes to the steps of how you can break down and teach students a thinking skill. And there's an example of comparing and contrast in there with you. And then there's also an opportunity to say, well, what am I going to do at the surface level? What am I going to do at the deep level and the transfer level? And the transfer levels are where we do the things like the big case studies and the project-based learning and those larger things where they put together all the knowledge and skills that they've done in the first few phases and put it all together in that last phase with those larger, really fun and engaging activities. So I'm going to pass the ball back over to Chris, but as Chris was going through she's always just got this amazing wealth of activities and examples and resources that she has put together. But as she's doing that, I think it may be important to look at through a different conceptual lens. We've looked at the curriculum through the conceptual lens of concepts and skills, and we've looked through those two things. But as Chris is explaining, I'd like you to look at through the lens of surface, deep, transfer, and how when she's going through the activity, sort of make a mental note of where you're going to be able to use these things. Chris?
Thanks, Ted. And I think Ted is bang on. We really need to be cognizant of those skill concepts that are sitting there along with the content concepts. The other thing that I want to say, and I've been mentioning it to the other groups as well, is that we are in a unique situation in science. This is different than what we've ever experienced before, because you've typically always had sort of your own silo of topics. You began a topic, you finish the topic. And it probably never really hit home to me more so than when one of my colleagues, who's been teaching for over 25 years, said to me, she teaches grade 2. And I said, you need to go grab that from grade 4. She said, I have no idea what a grade 4 teaches in science. I've never had to think outside of my box because we all did our own thing. We started it, we finished it. But now you're not. Now you're carrying through a concept that started in kindergarten with an overarching statement that goes all the way to grade 6. And what happened in kindergarten affected grade 1, affected grade 2, and affects you. So there is some need to be aware of some of the kingpin conversations and concepts that have really been covered already in Matter prior to, because in a perfect world, your grade 3s would have arrived at your door having done kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2 Matter, 3 years of work, of concepts like Ted was showing you, where those words came up the first time. But that didn't happen. So there is some bridging that needs to be considered here. And it's not just in the math that we need to bridge, it's in science as well. So as we looked at sort of at the opening piece with our curriculum document, we're talking about materials and we're talking about change. And this is a very heavy consideration and continuation on from where they came from. So there is an absolute need for you to consider, where are my kids at in this particular organizing idea of Matter? Like, what do they know? And where are the gaps? Where are the holes? And where are the bridges that I need to build? as far as the material, as far as the language, as far as previous knowledge is concerned. And so I'm not going to go through everybody's slide deck, but there are some key slides that I pulled out for you so that you have a sense of, just in the back of your mind, if you haven't done Matter yet, oh, okay, yeah, I might need to go back to find out whether they know that or not. So in kindergarten, they talk about what an object is. They define an object. They talk about its characteristics. They get into the properties, both physically managing them, describing them, and explaining them, but naming them as well, doing card sorts to put things together in categories, and letting them lead us to tell us what properties are, as opposed to us standing up and delivering and saying a property is. We have them just do a bunch of card sorts and tease out of them, why did you put these things together? What was it that you looked for? And then start to move those terminologies that they give us over into categories that fit well into properties. And then we also talk about the senses. And it's pretty hard to do any descriptive property, any kind of explanation in grade 3, if they have no knowledge of the senses and what sense would describe what. So you may have to do a little background visiting in this. And remember, you have access to all of the grade sciences, so you can go back and grab bits and pieces if you need it. So they define an object. They talk about a general property of an object. So color, size, shape, texture, those are such as, they're not onlys, right? They're other pieces that we included in there. But then we also look at in grade 1, they get into measurable properties. Wow, those shifted again. Examining properties with tools, like what kinds of tools can I use to look at an actual object, and how would I describe it to you if I looked at it through a microscope, or if I looked at it through a handheld enlargement of anything. Like if I just feel it and I describe it. And then what happens if I change it? So the different areas of measure that they looked at would be length, area, and mass. So those terms would already be familiar to students leaving grade 1. Direct comparisons tools, looking at properties that change, properties of change action. How can I make a change happen? What are things that I can control? What are things that I don't have control over? So if you don't think that they know senses, that would be one that would be worthy to go back and have a look at for sure. It doesn't have to be a long period of time, but there is some things that need to be happening through that. You could access the card sorts. They're found in the kindergarten, grade 1, and the grade 2 teachers. Some of them are using them as well. There's header cards. You can just randomly give them cards and say, where would you put these? And you would hope that in grade 3, some of the students would say to you, I think some of these should go into more than one. And that would be good, because we want to be able to say, what object could use all 5 senses to be described? That's kind of parallel to which particular material could have all 3 changes in states of matter, right? It's that same notion that we're trying to go through. By grade 2, we get into the properties of materials, looking at that rather heavily. And it actually kind of just ties right into grade 3. There's a big gray area there about where one ended and the next one starts. They really do overlap each other. So they talk about the fact that we do talk about natural and processed. Those are in there already, and we're talking about that again in grade 3. Looking at objects for a purpose, comparing the properties, testing and measuring, looking at the purposes for choice. What are the First Nations? Why did they choose? Why did they look at natural materials? Again, that ties very strongly into grade 3. That's very much what we're going to do. So one of the things that we did talk about in grade 1 and in grade 2 is that there are so many overlaps in math that you should be tying some of your math to your science concepts, especially in this area. If I'm going to give you properties of objects, I could use Cuisenaire rods, pattern blocks. I could use anything that you have in the classroom that gives me an opportunity to measure length. These could measure length, but I could sort them based on color. I could sort them based on size. I could sort them based on what could be combined. But all of those different things could be put together. Area is not a length times width. Area is more of how many squares get covered by an object. So again, that's something that they cover in grade 2, where I might take a can, sit it on top of a grid, and just trace around it. Approximately how many squares. Take a hula hoop, take various hula hoops. Which one has more area that it covers, which covers more surface on the carpet or the floor that you put it on? Or give them similar, same size hula hoops. Just go tell them to randomly go collect things from the classroom and put them inside. And then which one has covered more of the floor? It doesn't have to be anything more detailed than that, but that's really what we're looking at. So when we talk about matter still in grade 2, and we talk about that actions that can change, that's where they're talking about bending and twisting and stretching, and can I break it, and can I mold it, and can I change its shape? That's all part of the change action that they come out of grade 2, as well as the properties that have the ability to be changed. Like I can change the length of something. I can take a piece of wood and cut it in half, and I could stack it, and I change the length of it. I still have the same amount of matter, the same amount of wood, but I changed the length as it appears. I've changed the height of it by doing that. So again, those are things that can happen. But where are we going with this? We're going into what happens when I add something like heat to an object. How does that change it? What happens to it now? So we're adding another layer. So in grade 3, we really are looking at states of matter. We're looking at liquid, solid states and gases. We're looking at how those types of materials can be classified as natural or man-made. So those are pieces that we definitely want to make sure that they're clear on, but this is what we're unpacking. But this is a direct link to grade 2. Like this is just a slide from grade 2. It's almost sometimes a bit wondering about why, in fact, they didn't tie some of these more so together. We also look at cycles. They talked about cycles in living systems. Now we're back to, we could look at cycles again, like the water cycle as being one of those things where matter is continuously being cycled around and brought back. How does temperature or heat affect these? Reversible changes and non-reversible changes. So these don't all necessarily get equal time. They don't all necessarily get equal emphasis, but they all build on each other in the end for being able to describe those properties and to show you change action in each of those bits of matter. So I've created a foldable for you. For those of you who might know me from before, foldables are big in my world. They are graphic organizers, but they're designed in such a way that the entire unit sits inside one graphic organizer. They're just kept in a plastic pouch pocket, and they just keep it in a binder or wherever you have the kids keep their stuff. And they work for everybody from kindergarten right through to 30-level diploma courses that I make them for. But when I was going through this one in particular, especially in grade 2, as I started to see the linkages between 3 and 4, I really felt this was one that could benefit from having a foldable. So I'm just going to show you what's in it. I'm going to send a separate recording to show you how to put it together. It doesn't take long, maybe 5 minutes and it's done. I have the kids do them. I model it, they do it, follow me, they make their own. But then they've got something where they could maybe use that as sort of their notes, and where they would put any quizzes, any worksheets, anything that you have can all go into this one foldable. So it starts off though with a basic premise that we need to do a little bit of review here, because grade 3 is very heavily dependent on what they brought to the door with them. And so that means that there might have to be a little bit of a, what is matter, in their own words, not to be copied from the board. What is matter? So let's find out what they know about that. And if we need to do some bridging back, well, then this will help me to know that. What are some examples of matter? Give them some books, give them magazines, give them things they can cut up. Go find some pictures of them. They can even put fabrics in here. They can put whatever they want in here. These are pouches, and they can just slide the stuff right in. What are materials? How do we distinguish between matter and materials? Some people say, well, they're both the same. Well, yeah, they are in some respects, but there are some differences as well. And so how do we define materials? And then what are some properties of objects and materials? Because we need that terminology again for them as they start to build into the change of matter for grade 3. There's a whole section in here where it talks about the states of matter. And so when I talk about states of matter, I'm also going to give you in your list of resources, and I'll show you again where to find those. There's a bunch of card slides in there that the kids can cut up. And what I want them to do is, once they've listened to a video, I'll show you what I've got for you. Can they sort those and figure out which ones are the characteristics of a solid a liquid, and a gas based on what they've learned. And what if they don't know? What if they've never heard of solids, liquids, and gases before? This would be a great formative assessment for you, that after you watch the video with them and say, now let's cut these out, let's put them into the right pouch and see where they belong, but let them do it, not us do it for them. Let's not tell them where they belong. Let's see where they put them, and then let them have a shoulder discussion with their partner about, what did you put in your solids pouch, liquids pouch, gases pouch? And if they're not the same, what did you see that I didn't see? And let's have a conversation about it. And then as we move through, we start talking about, how can I make change happen? Heat is one of them. Temperature changes is what we talk about, the freezing, the boiling. So how do I make that change happen? What does it look like? And does everything change when I add heat to it? Does everything change back when I take the heat away? That's a conversation and part of the learning that has to get unpacked as they move through this particular unit. And one of them is certainly the water cycle. And so the water cycle is built into here, but it's only one version. And every version that I give you for them to work on is a slightly different vision or picture or model of it. So again, I'm checking to see, is it just that they're memorizing where something was on a picture, or are they actually understanding the process? And it doesn't matter what picture I give you, you know what you're going to be filling in because you can explain to me what's happening in that picture. And that's really important for us to make sure that we tease out. So if you are in need of going back and you think you might need to, find out what properties of materials. If you want to watch, this is a great short video, but it would allow them to fill in their foldable. I know some properties. They mentioned some on here. I know something about stretching. I know something about bending. So again, they could just watch these. All of these are short. They're maybe 6 minutes. But this is an assignment that we gave the students. We said, let's watch it. Let's pause the video because there's questions in there and they ask open questions. So we suggested stop it and just answer the questions with the kids. Have them give you answers and see what they come up with. That'll also give you good formative understanding as, yeah, they've got this. I don't have to worry about this. Or, oh, we might need to do a little bit more work on that. Okay, and then we can do some further examining. Go around the classroom, something that you saw in the video, go find something else that you could now use your senses to describe. Could you find me something that would give you more than one sense that could be used to describe it, and so on, right? So this is like a review one, and it would fill in that first review piece in your foldable, also help you understand where the students are coming from. When grade 2, we also talk about what's the difference between natural and man-made. And so with the natural and the man-made, again, I just walked around the house. When I did this for the grade 2s, I just went and grabbed a bunch of stuff, put them on here and just took a picture of them and just said, you know, which ones are which? Which ones would you say are natural, that the man didn't make, didn't process them? And which ones are made by somebody with human hands or with some chemical or whatever? And again, these are just links in here that you'll have access to in case you're not sure maybe how to explain what shells are all about, or this is salt. A lot of people would say, I think that's man-made. Not always. So this will give you a little background knowledge for you, the teacher as well, or for the students if you want to share it with them. And then again, research 5 processed materials and explain what natural materials were used to make them. This is grade 2. Sounds like grade 3 though, because this is pretty much where we're going. Same idea. So it's a very tight carryover from what they do. And that's why I say we're not in a silo anymore when it comes to a topic in science. We have to be very cognizant of what's happening. So both natural and processed products come from natural resources. Explain why this statement is true. That might be a little bit of a deeper understanding for me to see where the kids are at, right? I've done some work with them. We did a little bit of talk about natural and processed. Why do you think that statement might be true? Give me your best explanation. And again, as Ted said, don't ask me to explain it if you've never taught me what an explains answer would look like. I need to know what the verb explain means. Teach me how it is when I unpack it. So now when you ask me this question, I have a really good sense of what you're going to mark as an answer that is complete. Or how can you tell if something should be classified as processed? How would you make that decision? How would you know that? Like, what are the key pieces that you would have in the back of your mind to consider whether or not it was processed? So again, these are open-ended questions that I can ask the students. I could have them write it in their foldables. I could have it just work as a partner and they have to answer it orally. But again, it's giving you a little bit of a more of a deeper thought about where these kids are coming from and what they're thinking and processing is up to this point. So surface might be what natural resources are used to make processed products. So what do we know? What do we have in everyday kitchen that you use that's a natural item that you make something from it and it doesn't look the same anymore? So I could say flour and I made cookies. They look very different. I can't change it back to flour. It's not going to be the same. So that could be a starting point. That could be a surface level question. But a deeper one might be, what are some negative and positive impacts to society of making and using processed products compared to natural? That's a big question. Now, depending on what you've done with them, that could even be a transfer question, because now I get to do a little bit of, maybe I get to pick a new topic or a new item that I've never even researched before, and I do a little bit of work on it. But again, we want to make sure that they're clear on, what are examples of processed items? So disposable diapers, aspirin, artificial sweeteners, toothpaste, plastic bags, like those are examples of things that man has made, but they used natural materials to make them. And they had to change those natural materials to get the end product. So the question would be, can they think of something else that would fit into that list? Maybe research 5 processed products to find out what they are. And then I can go ahead and answer these questions, right? Maybe then I can come back and say, what's the positive and negative impact of that? I use the man-made material a lot, but in the process of making it, I'm depleting all of the natural resource to get it. And so down the road, I foresee that there will not be enough natural resources in that particular area to make that item. That's definitely a negative, right? So having that conversation and giving them the opportunity. One of the things that you have a very strong statement in is also on First Nations. So why did the First Nations, why do they place such a heavy value on land and on the natural products that come from Mother Earth? Because really, if we think about it, that was their life and their sustenance. That's where they got their food. That's where they got materials that would make them be able to move and transport and survive, to have a teepee. So one of the things in grade 2, and I just left it in here right now, is the birch bark canoe. That's a natural product. They used the natural bark of the tree. But I also included some other pieces in there that might be of interest. And if that's not something that your kids would be interested in, you don't live in an area where there's lots of birch trees, so they wouldn't be familiar with them. Maybe you want to switch to the Inuit. Let's talk about an igloo. Let's talk about how an igloo is made. So the tools, that's grade 2. How do I make a natural product? I'm making an igloo out of a natural product called ice, snow, heavily packed together. I'm using that to survive. What are the key pieces of making an igloo? What do I need to consider? And there's a couple of them in here that you might want to use. You don't have to use them all. These books that I'm showing you come from a series called the Mother, Grandfather, Grandmother series, and they're very succinct. And again, they're very specific about why they have value to Indigenous peoples. The buffalo is another one. There is nothing on a buffalo that would not have been used. Nothing. There's not a shred of a buffalo that would have been wasted. Everything from the hoof to the antlers to the fur to the meat to the hide, which would be what they would use not only to cover the teepees and to create a home that was warm, but also for blankets if they were using that, also for jackets and coats. Everything in a buffalo was used. And so in here, this just gives you a sense of what parts were used for what. This is an actual link that you can go in and just find some more information out. I won't go into that one right now. The most important would be the 4 sacred plants. So the cedar, the sage, the tobacco, the sweetgrass. And again, the books came from grade 2 because they talk about them there. But now we're going to go one step further in why. What was the relationship? That's your question. What is it about that natural relationship with the earth? So in each one of these books, I attached a link for you with Elder Bertha. She talks about why cedar is so important and what do they do with it? That's one of the other questions. What did they do with all this stuff? They made medicine. In some cases, it was part of the religious belief. In some case, it was whatever the use was and still is important. So the same thing about sage, the same thing about tobacco, the same thing about sweetgrass. All of these we can walk around in the pastures of Alberta and collect them, right? Most of these we can just go out, we can go and get sage in any bush in Alberta if we know what to look for. Do we know how to properly harvest it when we respect the land? That may be something the kids have to learn. Do we know how to find sweetgrass and how to pick it properly? All of those pieces. So again, it's just another way to link those natural events. Okay. So talking about plants and ceremony, ceremony is mentioned also as one of those important pieces. What ones do we use for ceremony? Many people know that sage is used for smudging. All four are used for smudging. What is smudging? Maybe they've never known that. They've never seen it. What's important about it? Why don't I blow on it when I light it? Why don't I just take my breath and blow on it till it starts to burn a little bit faster? You would never blow on smudge. You would only fan it with your hand. Why? Okay, those are pieces that children should know. All right, let's move here. Come on. So then sort of to go towards the end of this, if we watch some of those, I'm not saying all of those videos would be important to watch, but if you watch some of them, if sage is used in ceremony and we are using that for protocol when we start a meeting and we use that to smudge, how did it get from the leaf form to the smoke that's coming out of it, which is what we're using? So again, we have a change in form, change of matter. I've changed from leaves to smoke. And that's really where we kind of want to finish up the last sort of bit that we're going to tie up all of the pieces together. So states of matter, the matter of changing from a liquid to a solid to a gas. Okay, those are the three different states of matter, but can they be changed? Can they be reversed? Can they not be reversed? So again, this is an excellent one, and I comment on it in the foldable for the students to go through and listen to, because in the listening, they have an activity to do in the foldable so that they can go right through that and do some work. In the absence of a book or doing these face-to-face, which there would be more hands-on if we were doing them face-to-face, the videos are what I'm putting in here for now, just as resources, but hopefully there's also some books that you may have in the classroom that would work. And so here you've got watch the video on states of matter, write down any examples that come to mind that they're thinking of that they've heard in here that they didn't see, but they know, they think that that's one of them. And then what are some of the characteristics? And those are the pieces that they have to start doing. So in this particular one, they're going to take the foldables, the hexagons that are cut up. They have elements or characteristics of a solid, a liquid, or a gas. And if I was listening carefully, I should be able to place those into the right pouch in my foldable. So that's where I can have that shoulder conversation with my partner. We could have them out. You could walk around. You could do a quick oral. Tell me about this group. Why did you guys put this group together? Right? Having that conversation. So why did they choose that state that they put it into? These are the cards that you have that are available to you. And I don't know why this keeps going to this because these are fixed, but I will make sure that they are not running over. So I just cut these out when I put them into the foldable just to sort them. And you could use them for a lot of things, not just for that. They could rewatch the video and listen to see whether they got them in the right places. I took most of the ones in the video so that they'd have a place that they could connect to, or you could do it as a class. You don't have to go back to the video. Can you name some matter that has all three states? Water was a good example, right? We said that water could be all three states. It could be liquid, solid, or a gas, depending on what I do to it. If I add heat to it, if I cool it off. What about something like honey? Honey is a liquid. It can be a solid as it cools. It's a solid. It can be heated to be a liquid. It's not going to be a gas. So again, can they come up with some examples of their own that could go to all three or just two states? Like just see what they come up with. And then having that conversation about this doesn't have to be a huge long lesson. It can just be embedded right into the conversation is when is the change reversible and when isn't it? Well, I can reverse water when it's frozen. I can let it melt. As I just leave it at room temperature, add heat to it, it turns back to liquid. I can reverse it. I cannot take an egg and fry it and expect I'm going to get it back into the shell again and it's going to look like it did before. That's a permanent change. That's not going to change. So again, those are the pieces that we kind of want to make sure that we have in there. So in this case, part of the research and experimenting, they do experimenting already, but research is another piece that you have that is in here. I would strongly hope that we would do some hands-on, because this matter unit is a huge hands-on opportunity for us. And so every one of these is a link that you could use. You could split them up and have them each do little ones, or you could do them as class demos. But just something that gives them an actual model. And they're very simple. When you click them on, it'll tell you we're moving from melting to solidification of wax. In this case, you just take little Dixie cups, put a candle in there, a little small amount. Just do a light, or take a hot plate and put it on there. And then they see what happens when it cools off, right? So it's just quick and easy, but something that they can tangibly even see at home. People have candles at home and they do those. So why wouldn't we give them those opportunities? So each one of these is a different one. The one that's probably the most fun is the can one. So I fill a can with some hot air and I turn it upside down in some ice cold water. And because I do that, it's going to condense the air back down and it just shrinks the can. And the kids just think that's super cool, that this thing is just in front of their eyes, this metal is just shrinking up on them. So there's lots of fun little activities that we can do to get the point of change of state across to students. Also having a conversation about water, just saying to them, did you know that we're actually drinking the water that the dinosaurs did? And most kids will go, yeah, right. And really, we are. Water doesn't go away. Water's always been recycled. It's the same water that we had 3 billion years ago. It hasn't gone away. It is just recycled through a cycle called the water cycle. So that's the last piece that we want them to start in looking at this. In grade 5, they do a ton of work on the water. So this is an important link to that. But what is the water cycle? Like most kids just think water goes down into the dirt and it's gone. Right? It doesn't have any, it's not part of the world anymore. So having that conversation about dinosaurs and us drinking the same water is an important one for them. So what parts of the water cycle, what are the parts? They could listen to this, you could cover it with them. Remember that the diagram I gave them in the foldable is not the diagram from the video, is not the diagram that I gave you in the resource file that you can use with them. So it's always just a new version. So I want to make sure that they know what they're doing. This is a great way, even though there's snow on the ground right now, you could go out and get some snow. There's a form of water, right? It's precipitation. So letting them pick up on that. But this one here is also a way for you to do a really simple water cycle in the class right now. All you need is a plastic bag. You could draw on it if you wanted to. Put some water in the bottom, make sure it doesn't have any holes in it, Ziploc, put a little bit of water in it. And then if you put it on the window, now it might be too cold now with the snow coming down, but you could use a hair dryer, a blow dryer, and just blow on this. And what will happen is the water will start to evaporate, condense as it hits, and then the water droplets come down. So kids get to see the whole water cycle in a bag. It's kind of a cool way to do it, but it's nice for them to actually see all the components of the water cycle happen right in front of them. And it's not a big experiment to do, that's for sure. So again, I've got that one in there. And also for those of you who are not familiar with PBS, the public broadcast system, they also have tons of educational. So in here, they have a wealth of information on water cycle, all of them with a little bit of a different view to it. So again, I could break students up in different groups and have them each explore a different aspect that they're focused on, and then bring that conversation back again to the class, right? So there's an explain, what did I learn? I'm explaining what was the highlights of that particular. So again, you've got lots of resources there for the water cycle that would be of help to you. I've been collecting books along the way. I've been also trying to find resources because people are asking, do you have any things that you found? So this is one book that I have found that is great. Took some of the materials for the slide deck out of this one as well. This is also one that we're showing, it's a great one for scientists. So if we're starting to get that scientific method going properly, this is a nice little handout book for that as well. States of Matter. This is a great one because again, it brings home the different pieces that I sit down at the table every day and eat something. How did that particular item that I'm eating change in its original state? Like that's just, most kids don't even think about it. Neither do we. We just eat what's in front of us. We don't think about that it actually changed its state. So these are the things that are found in that book. And this is what it looks like on the cover. We're looking at solids, liquids, or gases, same thing. This is another little book in there. Again, it gives them just a highlight of the different states. Analyze It is a great one if I'm getting into testing and explaining, taking my research that I found, what are my results, and putting them into some kind of manageable order so that I can draw a conclusion from it. So this is a stepping stone to doing a really deep kind of write-up, but it definitely is very appropriate for grade 3 students. And then I also have one from, this is Capstone. Capstone has graphic books and on all different science topics. This one's on states of matters. And I know that the graphics or graphic novels right now are big for kids. So I just thought, well, I'll show that one to you in case somebody wanted to look into that. So here's a question that we could ask them. We could ask them something like, precipitation replenishes water to the earth. Demonstrate how that's true. How could they show us that? What do I understand about the water cycle that would help me to demonstrate that I can tell you that that is true? It could be as simple as that plastic bag description. It could be something else that they've come up with. It could be one of the videos that they're going to have. It could be just a diagram that they draw for us. It doesn't have to be anything over the top, but this is one way for me to get a sense of where they're at. I could give them a Venn diagram and maybe ask them to compare liquids and gases. How are they the same? How are they different? Okay, very simple, very straightforward. But one of the things that, and all that work that Ted put together for you, okay, I'm not sure why these are changing now that we're in slide shape mode because they don't look like that in the other mode, but I'll fix those up. This is what we're looking at right now for our learner outcome. These are all the things that we were doing in this unit. Not all of them equally weighted, equal time, because so many of them build right into each other and on top of one another. Like you can't really do one separate from the other. But you're really looking at, these are the understandings from each of all of those different rows of cusps. So when I'm sitting down and creating a final summative, when I'm sitting down to create a performance-based assessment, whatever it is you're going to do, this is really what you're looking at. You're looking at embedding all of those understandings. How am I going to demonstrate that I know that, given that not all of these are equally weighted? Some of them, as I said, they build on each other. So it's how will I demonstrate that I know how to investigate and analyze materials that have potential to be changed? What will you ask me to do that will model that and demonstrate that I know that? So here are the resources, the books that were used. Some of the little books that I just showed you, like the solids, the Analyze Matter, these are coming from a library from Spark Library from Pearson. So Pearson has a whole bunch of little books, and I was in touch with them. And so they've given us access, anybody who wants it, not saying you want, but some people were looking just for an individual little book to buy. And that's what I was looking for too, is where can I find some resources to show you? So that's where I got those books from. The Spark books are in here. And if you wanted to have a look to see what else there was, any teacher can have a 30-day free trial to go in there. And that's what I'm working on right now as well. It's just a free trial to go through and have a look at them. So if that's something that helps you, or you would prefer just to order a book, then I'll leave that up to you. Okay. So that takes us to the end of that one. Are there any questions along the way? Is this helpful? I guess from both sides of the presentation that you've had now, both the assessment side and the sort of the resource side, it would be helpful if you could throw in the chat box that this is what you're looking for, not looking for. If you don't feel comfortable in the chat box, just send us an email. You're not going to offend us. What we're looking for is to make sure that we're hitting the mark in giving you what you're looking for and helping you out to sort of find your way through. So I'll show you the website again, just to make sure that everybody knows where to find the resources that you're going to have. I just want to point out to you also that the templates, anything that Chad shared with you, are also in the file folder, so you can go The slide deck that I just shared with you, resources are always in there as well. So you'll always have access to all of that. You don't have to worry about not getting those. And then the other thing we wanted to point out, some of you, I see some of the names here, but some of you may be interested in gizmos. If you're not familiar with them, they're like an interactive worksheet. They could be a lesson in itself, very interactive for the kids. And what we're looking to just provide you is an opportunity to see the math and the science gizmos that are available. They are posted to the new Learn Alberta site, but they're tied very strongly just to that one outcome. And so if we do it through Explorer Learning, who are the holders of the gizmos, who the license comes from, they will give you a login and a password, and then you can just go in and see them all and draw from them at any time. There's nothing posted right now in New Learn Alberta for science, but the science gizmos are all in there and you can definitely go and access them. So there are a couple, we just finished a whole series of intro sessions. There's going to be more in January. So if you go to the CARC website, you will find that there are lots of free nights after school, 45 minutes, where you just go in, they'll give you the login password, they'll show you the site, and then you're kind of free to go after that and do whatever. There will be 2 each week in English and 1 in French for the French immersion school. So if you have French immersion colleagues in your building, you can let them know that those are available in French as well. The science is also being translated into French. So all the sessions that Ted and I are doing are being translated into French, and they will be posted on our website as well. Now let's go to the website. Let's go there right now. And it's not there. No, it's interesting. And that's not what I want either. Oh, okay. Our website is under maintenance. So let me just see if I can refresh here. Okay, no. I'm going to put it in the chat box for those of you who have not been there. I just want to make sure that everybody has the link to it. Okay. They were just adding something to it, so I didn't realize that they were still working on it. So when you go to this site, you will find a file folder that says cohorts, and you just click on cohorts. And when you go into that, it will say science and math. So you just click on the science and pick your grade. And then every session we do, for example, today is November 7th, it's always put into your folder by date. So the November 7th one is there, the October one is there, the one we did in August is there, like they're all in there. So you'll find every one of the sessions by date, and they're not going away. Like you don't have to race to download stuff. Everything will be there for a long time. You don't need to worry about it going away because it'll be there for next year as well. So just wanting to make sure. Nope, sorry, can't get into that one.
It is working. The link is working for us. You'll see a comment there that's working from Shala, and for me, it's working as well. So
excellent. Okay, well, maybe I just got
there.
gremlins in mind today. Let me just try it again here and see if I can get in on this side. All right, so for those of you who are in there, if you can just make sure that you can find the drop-down menu, go to cohorts. Yeah, mine's not letting me in, not sure why. And if you can't get in for any reason, there is a link there too that allows you to say lost password or can't get in, just click it on, and then we will get back to you for that as well. All right, so that is it for Matter. I hope that gives you a starting point at least.